Five, four, three, two, one.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin on behalf of Eskin Farm Raising Training. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to our 39th webinar. This subject, as our special guest will know, is something that's very personal to me. Unrestricted gifts, the gifts needed most. And I'd first like to, she'll get a fuller introduction in a moment, but I'd like to bring on our subject matter expert for this week, Missy Gale, who's president and CEO of Gale Associates, and I met her when she was speaking at an association of fundraising professionals gathered here in San Antonio, and she speaks all around the region and the country. First of all, Missy, thank you for joining us. And I have to ask the most important question: how is the Gale family doing?
Everybody's fine in our household, thank you. My
That's
two
good.
girls are grown and off, but they're doing well as well.
Good to hear. We like to start with a stimulating quotation, and I found this and I really liked it. And it is, I think he was a genius and he had enormous impact in the last century, and that's Walt Disney. And he said it's kind of fun to do the impossible. And what we want to say, by the way, I was just, Misty, I'm a little older than you. Do you remember on Sunday nights, The Wonderful World of Color?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Sunday night, we had to get dinner done early to see that.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of the impact of Walt Disney, and also, by the way, Disney has formed a learning company that I've done a program with. I mean, enormous impact in helping people laugh and enjoy themselves, and his legacy continues till today. But we're going to tell you, unrestricted gifts aren't impossible, and we're going to spend an hour. And the more every day I got older and more gray during my 25 years at three different higher education institutions, I respected unrestricted gifts just more and more, because they can help with any other issue. Missy, we like saying learning the fundraising is like learning to play the piano, like learning to golf, like learning the program to do a computer. It's three steps. You learn it, you do it, and you do it again. You do it better, you do it again, you do it better. I guarantee you, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Missy, we like to call our webinar audience our learning community. We have CEOs, executive directors, directors of development. We got board chairs, board members, donors, volunteers, and we love them all because we really think that nonprofits, and you've seen it up close for 3 decades, that nonprofits bring out the best in people. And you were heroes before COVID, but there's like 100,000 nonprofits in the state of Texas, and I don't care what you do in that nonprofit, you are a hero to us now more than ever. Um, we have a couple objectives today behind having a little fun. But I'd like to bring on Valerie Finley, who's been a consistent member of our learning community. She's executive director of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. Valerie, what would you like to know about unrestricted gifts at 5 o'clock that you don't know at 4 o'clock?
Well, probably one of the biggest things is we all understand the value of it. We all know how critical it is to have them. So how can we engage our funders? Because everybody wants to sit there and buy the food. They want to pay the rent, but they don't understand it also took staff to do that. And then sometimes we can sit there and put in the piece of the case management, but there's still all of the other expenses that aren't covered. We need the office, we need the phones, we need the everything. And so as much as we try to educate people that, and they know this is the hard part, they know it, but it doesn't give them that warm fuzzy. So how can we make the package look prettier so that people want to fund it?
Valerie, that is a $64 question. And I'll tell you what, Missy and I have made a deal. If the question is very, very easy, I take it. If it's a challenging question, she takes it. So Missy's going to get this one. I promise we'll get to it probably in the first 5 or 6 questions. Great question, Valerie. And thank you for being such a supportive member of our learning community.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, Missy, 3 years ago, Andrea and I formed Eskin Fundraising Training. During my 25 years in higher education advancement, I had the privilege of working with an impressive group of business and community leaders who were absolutely fearless in their business and their personal and their civic roles, with one exception. You know that exception, asking for the gift. And, I think part of the responsibility is with us as practitioners, that we can do a better job of demystifying the art and science of fundraising. We're excited. We have now webinars scheduled up until April. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to have the guests
Great.
that we have. I do a monthly newsletter. What we're going to do is send you we're going to do a post on LinkedIn and Facebook about 5:05, and then our producer, and I want to introduce him. I forgot to introduce him, Michael Argent, who's with with Game Day Media. Michael, can you explain how people can either type in a question, or better yet, we want to see their pretty faces. They can come on camera.
Sure. So if you have a question, you can either type it in the Q&A box below, or you can raise your hand. And if you do that later on in the webinar, I'll promote you to a panelist, and then you can turn on your camera and your microphone, and then ask the question to Jim yourself. So those are your two options.
Great, and we would prefer to see you. By the way, and then Michael's going to do a magic spin cycle, and around 6 to 6:30 tonight, we're going to post the recording and slides on Facebook and LinkedIn. For some reason, if you don't get our monthly newsletter, you'll get the slides. Click there, and it'll take you to where you can get our free newsletter. Missy, I was proud to write my first book last year, The 10 Simple Fundraising Lessons, and getting ready to write book 2 on the virtual fundraising lessons. So, Missy, as you know, you spent 3 decades in the sector. Our audience is not a stranger to financial pressures, okay? And every executive director and CEO I know of a nonprofit, they know how to stretch nickels into dimes, except now they got to stretch them into quarters. But the good thing is that we know that philanthropy is very resilient. Last year we raised a record $450 billion, and we have so many good indicators. The fundraising effectiveness project hasn't closed out the year, but at the 9-month point, giving was 7.6% over the year before. We have seen donor advised funds explode. It was a record Giving Tuesday, and the new patron saint of philanthropy, Mackenzie Scott, gave $6 billion over the year. The last round was 4.2. Guess what, folks? It was all unrestricted and all up front. And the other thing is that we know historically the best indicator of philanthropy is the stock market, and the stock market has never been doing better. So we talked about it's not easy being a donor. There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the country. And Missy, we like to say, as you know, if you're a donor, you're not choosing between the good and the bad. You're choosing between the good and the good. And a nonprofit has to really spend time with 1.5 million nonprofits in the country, 100,000 in the state of Texas, 6,000 in San Antonio. What can you say that every other nonprofit can't? And so ultimately our job is to message it so the donor knows, likes, and trusts us. The great majority of nonprofits, as this slide illustrates, have budgets under $500,000. And I think, Missy, our audience is primarily made up of staff and board from small to mid-sized nonprofits. But whether you're big or small, whether you serve the arts or animal issues or health or education, the driver is passion. And passion helps you do great things. We like to break fundraising into 4 distinct parts: identifying who you're going to ask, forging a personal and emotional bond. So when number 3, when it comes time to solicit, the donor prospect is more likely to say yes and say yes at the level requested. And finally, stewardship, because after Missy makes a Gale gift to us, we're going to come back to her next year and ask her to give again and ask her to consider increasing that amount. So we have a little mantra at this point. We're going to ask everyone to type in these 3 words. We're nonprofit strong. And Missy, what are we?
We're nonprofit strong.
You get an A+ for me. And it's a great privilege to introduce a colleague of mine, a very accomplished colleague, who is at now 11 years, has been the president of CEO of M. Gale Associates based in Fort Worth. And I don't know if there's anything they haven't done. She has, her firm handles a lot of different fundraising and public relation issues and to strengthen the position of nonprofits. She has a diversity of clients from hospitals to museums to educational institutions, community service, and I'll start there. But Missy, I know December 26th was a sad day for us in the nonprofit profession. And by the way, did you know the Presidents Truman and Ford passed away on December 26th? And we lost one of the wisest and most respected people in our profession, Doug Lawson. And Missy was very, very, very lucky to have Doug as one of her mentors. Could you share maybe one of the valuable lessons you learned from Doug?
Well, sure. And anybody that knew Doug knew that he was a very optimistic person and a loving person. He was always available for anybody at any time. I think, in the early years when I first knew Doug, I was young in my career in a healthcare organization, and he was our consultant. And he would just come in with so much charisma and energy and excitement that he got all of us excited about doing our jobs, and he taught us all how to be better fundraisers. But I think that the one takeaway that he has left with me that will be indelible forever is something that he used to say when we'd start to get concerned about something. Well, what if this happens, then we can't do this or this or that. And he used to turn around and he said, it's never a matter of if or and, it's and both. So in other words, he never said if not, he always said and both. And that has stuck with me, and it is a way that I hope to approach most things that I do.
Yeah, and I had the chance to work with him a few times, and I've read his book, and again, he was one of the giants in our profession, and will be missed, but will live on in people like you that he mentored so well. Missy, are you ready to begin with our Q&A?
Sure.
Okay, let's see if we got some tough questions for you, but we won't start too tough. How would you define the difference between restricted and unrestricted gifts?
Well, I hope everybody on this call understands that one, right?
Well, let's not say anything.
An unrestricted gift can be made to a charitable organization and used for the most part in the manner the charity would desires. That means it could be used for operations, it could be used for a project, it could be used for many different things, and it's unrestricted. The donor does not restrict the gift. A restricted gift is one that is designated for a specific thing. It could be for a project, it could be for an endowment, it could be for operating. Yeah. But it is restricted into that particular thing. And it has caveats around, usually around the amount of time the organization has to spend the money.
Good, thank you. And let's move on. Unrestricted are typically the kind of gifts that nonprofits need the most, yet their leadership is least likely to ask for. Why does that dichotomy exist?
You know, I'm scratching my head for a minute because the lady that asked the question earlier is
Yeah,
talking
and
about the same thing.
yeah,
I think it's because people are used to, when they're asking for something, they're used to asking for something. And so they move into what I would call a very transactional mode of buy this,
mhm,
buy the cereal, buy the laundry detergent, buy the building, as opposed to think about investing in our organization in a way that we can achieve many goals. So I think it's a natural tendency for people to look, especially leadership in nonprofit organizations, to look at the ask as a sale instead of an investment.
good, good. I think this will continue, and hopefully between these questions we'll respond to Valerie's question. How do we communicate to donors on the value of giving unrestricted gifts to the success of the nonprofit? And I think with Valerie, how do we get people excited about giving unrestricted?
You know, I remember, gosh, probably 15 plus years ago, when I really started into consulting first with Doug and then later on my own, talking with organizations about an organizational case for support. And very few had that. They had a case for support for a capital campaign. They had white papers for specific things that they needed. But they didn't really have, outside of their mission, a way to describe their overall case. And beyond that, they didn't have a way to describe to a donor how to invest in a way that the donor could put it in their mind, whether they have $20 to give or $20 million to give. Which means that they really have a hard time translating the organizational budget in terms of organizational need, right?
Yeah.
So it's really easy to look up a charity, and we know that donors do it. We all do it. You look at a 990 and you say, what size charity is this? And you know, how much of their revenue comes from philanthropy? How much of their revenue comes from various forms of income? And when you do that, you start to see, okay, if this organization is a $5 million organization, yet they have a vision to do this, right, to go from here to here, then they've got to be able to describe that in a way that a donor can invest in them instead of a thing within them, if that makes sense. And so one of the things I talk about a lot is, what is the organizational case for support? Because that doesn't change all that much. The strategies can change, the vision can change, but the overarching case doesn't change, and it should have a monetization within it.
Yeah. This is going to build on what we were just talking about. You know, messaging is everything. So how do you recommend describing unrestricted gifts?
You know, it's interesting. I don't use the term restricted or unrestricted.
What do you use? What do you use?
Giving. Consider a gift, right? And so really, if you're considering giving, you don't have to restrict. Even in a capital campaign, we'll have folks that will go into, a lot of capital campaigns have in them now, well, campaigns have in them capital endowment capacity building. And the staff will get very tied into, are they giving to the capital? Are they giving to the endowment? And it's, oh, they're giving. Let's just ask them to give.
Yeah.
Then if they want to restrict it, we'll talk about that when they decide they want to restrict it, but they don't have to restrict it. So if you're talking about giving, how do you message that? You're messaging overall mission, vision, goals, strategies. Those kinds of things are your messaging points, not a restriction or an unrestricted gift.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. You know, one of the things over the historic last year and impact of COVID-19, We saw a lot of foundations and funders loosen the restrictions. I'm thinking of the Ford Foundations, a lot of the big players. And then Mackenzie Scott comes along, and she is given in 2019, in 2020, $6 billion. Guess what? Was all unrestricted. It was all up front. What do you think that tells us?
Well, it would be nice if it told us that foundations are no longer going to require restrictions, but I don't think that will be the case. I think the reason funders have restrictions is the way their foundations get set up by the donor, right? That sets in place. I want to create a foundation that will provide for the humane society or humaneness of animals for the next, perpetuity of years. So I don't know that restrictions are going to go away. I was very excited to see foundations loosen restrictions to so that they could make gifts to operating and unrestricted gifts that organizations could use where most needed. I think that what Mackenzie Scott tells us is that she kind of demonstrated that nonprofits can tell their story without you knowing it. Which means, your 990s are important. Your websites are important. What's out there that is showing what your impact is important. And if those things are important, people will invest in those. Does that mean that all foundations and funders will automatically invest? No, not necessarily. But I do think, kind of getting back to this idea of foundations, we all know from Giving USA's reports and any other studies that we do that individuals give away the most money.
About 70%,
Individuals give away the most money. And the amazing thing is that individuals give away the most money easiest. It's easier to get money from an individual than it is from a funder.
And it's a lot quicker. It's a lot quicker.
Sure. But it takes a while to build a base of donors, to find a donor that can invest in your organization the way maybe some funders from your community can do that. And so as nonprofit leaders and fundraisers, we work very hard on our restricted ask to foundations, and we prepare all of that. And then we tend to mimic that across the board in everything else we do. And it's not necessary. I mean, it's just when you're talking to individuals that you can get them excited about your organization and show them what it is in a monetary way, what you need, as opposed to a thing. I think they just invest.
You preach that board and management should lead by example.
Right.
Is it a fair expectation for a board and member to contribute to unrestricted giving?
I think board members should always make unrestricted gifts.
Good. Hey, repeat. Will you do me a favor? Repeat that.
Board members should always make unrestricted gifts.
Give me a fist bump on that. A virtual fist bump. I love that. Hey, what's the gift range for unrestricted gifts?
Well, we just saw Mackenzie Scott, so I guess it's
I know
0 to 6 billion, right? It's 0 to 6 billion and anything in between. Typically, I mean, I would say this, and we do have these. I do have these conversations with others. When people are going to give over time, typically when they're going to pledge over time, there's often a restriction. I don't know that there needs to be, but there's often a restriction because of the way they're asked, right? And so when does that pledge kind of, the pledge amounts come into play? Usually around $10,000 or more, right? People are going to consider making a pledge. How does that impact restricted or unrestricted? Typically when the ask is made, it's for a restriction of some sort. But the proliferation of monthly giving and giving societies has allowed for more unrestricted giving to go on longer, which means that the gifts can be higher. And again, it depends on how you're counting them. And I know we may talk about that later. If you're counting cumulative giving, or if you're counting a single gift, right? Because often monthly givers get ignored, but their cumulative giving is just coming up.
God bless monthly givers.
Yeah. And then what do? We try to rob Peter to pay Paul by asking them for a restricted gift.
Hey, listen, that you could perfectly have synced into my next question. You know, typically the first gift that a donor might make is a modest gift, and it could be to an annual fund that is unrestricted. And then we grow the relationship, and the donor is ready to give more. Do you see that we can implement a strategy where we keep the unrestricted gift as they make a larger gift for a restricted purpose?
Well, always in major gift fundraising, you know this from your work, we always say to the donor, we're how appreciative we are of their annual investment, right, to
Mhm.
the organization, and that we don't want that to change. And when we ask them to give to a specific thing, we ask that to be over and above their current giving, their annual giving. So we generally, if we say it right, we context that right. Does it always happen? No. When people have made a pledge, they'll often just kind of let their annual gift go by the wayside.
Yeah.
I'm a big, because I'm do a lot of campaigning. I'm a big proponent of bundling if you have to bundle, which means, you know, look at what they're giving annually. And also, if you're asking for more for a specific thing, then make that a combined gift and offer recognition wherever you need to make it appropriate.
Hey, do you know of any um, endowed unrestricted funds?
You know,
I
I,
dream about that, by the way.
yeah, endowments tend to try to get into a certain funding for spending purposes.
Yeah, yeah,
So they'll create funds so that they can spend, it's an accounting thing. Again, it's all internally driven, doesn't have to be.
yeah,
So yes, when endowments are small with organizations, I've often seen them just be flat out endowments for the
yeah.
benefit of the organization. Typically, though, they're using that for physical maintenance and things like that
Yeah.
right now.
What ways do you recommend for the stewarding of donors who give to unrestricted funds?
I think stewardship plans need to start a lot sooner than they do in most organizations, meaning direct stewardship. I did a program a few years back with Donor Search, and Donor Search reported on a study that they had done over a period of time on people who made an unrestricted gift of $5,000 to an organization, a first-time gift of 5,000. And
Nice.
the study showed, just they gave them a gift, right? And the study showed that if they didn't have human contact within 12 months, they were unlikely to make a gift of that size again in the period of the next few years. But if they had human contact, they were likely to give at that level or higher. And that didn't discuss restriction or unrestriction. It was just a gift. I think that when people give, the 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 idea that philanthropy was born in churches, when you think back to, and this is something Doug used to teach a lot actually, when you know philanthropy was born in churches and you learned how to tithe your church and then you learned how to give, and that's how, well, the world today is learning how to give in a lot of different ways, and we have to teach them how to give. And so when someone makes a gift of $500, that may be enormous to them, or $50, it may be enormous to them. How can we get in and steward quicker and sooner so that they repeat? I don't think, again, I'm going to take away the restriction and unrestriction. I don't think it matters whether it was restricted or not. It was a gift.
Mhm.
So how can we thank people and show unique ways and have a real stewardship plan in place? So it's not just you got your thank you and then in 6
Yeah.
weeks you get another testimonial and you're going to get another ask and until you give again.
And you said those two magic words, a human touch. That now we have to deliver either curbside or virtually, but still it could be a human touch.
Right. Absolutely.
I don't know if you got to this. What do you recommend as the best ways to solicit unrestricted funds?
Make an ask.
Okay.
I mean, you know, and there are different ways to solicit unrestricted funds based on your strategy, right? So if your strategy is acquisition, where most gifts are made originally, you're going to do that most likely today through social media, digital, et cetera. There's where organizations can start to incorrectly lay the groundwork for restrictions by not even realize it, by saying, buy us 20 pairs of socks, buy us, when you break it down like that, you're showing them how to restrict.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
So I'm much more into this idea of global asking, getting involved in showing where the organization is going and giving a push towards that. So in acquisition, each of the tactics of fundraising, I guess is my point, inside, whether you're an acquisition, annual fund, major giving, or planned giving. Of course, planned giving is a little different, but all up to planned giving, your tactics can be very similar.
Okay, I hope you don't think this question's too cute, but they're called unrestricted funds. But in most institutions, there are some restrictions on them. Can you, again, I give you the tough questions.
Well, and I'm going to offer out, I shared with you a link earlier that kind of I was taking a look at this, right? So there are some restrictions in the amount of time that organizations decide they're going to keep gifts on their books. There are some rules around booking gifts, etc. But in general, the unrestricted gift can be spent at any time. It even can be held in reserve. It depends on the organization's policies around their reserves, and it can be spent for, in general, operations or for the focus of the charitable cause. So if the organization, where they do need to be careful is if they have a for-profit arm, or if they have areas of the organization where they are operating in a for-profit vein. In general, they're not going to move unrestricted. They shouldn't be moving unrestricted philanthropic gifts to them.
And if the past year taught us anything, it's those organizations that had operating reserves and or endowments were able to maintain optimum programs and services.
Sure. Yeah.
And
I think organizations, as they grow endowments, should consider a percentage of unrestricted gifts going there. If it's unrestricted and you're trying to grow your endowment, then let's say 10% is going there, unless the donor asks it not to.
By the way, I got plenty of more questions, and we're going to continue this. But at this point, Michael, do we have anybody in the audience that would like to ask a question?
We do. We have Matt is raising his hand, and we also have a typed in question. So which would you rather do first?
I'll tell you what. Is Matt ready to come on screen?
He's raising his hand, so I'll have him jump on and ask him to turn on his camera.
Remember, if it's a tough one, Missy, I'm going to give it to you. Matt, how's it going? Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
If you want, I can read you the written question while we wait for Matt. If you want.
Okay, give us a head start. And I think there he is. I can see him. Matt, can we hear you? No.
He's muted.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, Jim. And
how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Let's hear your question. And by the way, you teach LinkedIn, don't you, in the San Antonio area, among many, many other things?
I do it all over the world there, Jim.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, but my question is about my own nonprofit and the 990. So, Missy, we're new to this. The 990 got my attention. Obviously, that's a document that shows actual expenses. What kind of information should a new nonprofit, which we are, post in that so that people can feel that we are honest brokers of their funds in the future? So right now we're in a deficit, but eventually we want to get into,
there are places in the 990 where you can put in more on your charitable vision and strategy. So, you'll see where they put the mission and things like that. That's where you really want to go ahead and fill that out completely. And if you're new, you want to, in addition to, anybody looking at your 990 can see how old you are. So that's okay. But if you're new, I think it's really important as you lay down that mission. This is our mission, and also put your vision in and where you're headed. Our startup costs are high right now. I mean, you can say things like that in the 990 because they're reading them.
We've got a pretty accurate, we just had our own little internal audit, so we have a pretty accurate, you know, cost analysis. So yes, thank you so much. This has been very helpful, Misty. Thank you. And
And
Missy,
Matt, and Missy would say the 990 is about the most effective, cost-effective communications PR tool. It's really just sweat equity. You can do it, you or Don can do it, Matt. And then when you post it on GuideStar, man, the world's going to get to it, right?
Yep, absolutely. You do want to post it on GuideStar. You do want to put it out there for the world to see as you're ready.
Okay.
Usually organizations will wait until they have their first audit, but you can certainly do it sooner. Trade secret with consultants, anyone that calls us or inquires, the first thing I do is pull their 990. I can understand a lot about who they are before we have a conversation.
so Missy, I'll just say this. I'm not trying to sell my services, but if you have questions about your LinkedIn profile, feel free to reach out to me, okay?
Awesome, thank you.
That's fair, because we kept on saying, you got to ask, you got to
That's right,
ask.
you better ask.
Yes.
We're not a shy people.
Well, and I like that. I do like that, Jim Eskin, and I wanted to reach out to you on something else, but I'll do that afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
This has been awesome. This is awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Matt.
I'll stay to the end, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Michael, do we have somebody who's typed in a question?
Yes, we do.
the
I'll go ahead
question?
and read that. It's from Valerie, and she's asking, how do we report when someone gives an unrestricted gift and then comes back later wanting a written report on how many people it helped? We may not have tracked it in this manner.
That's odd that a person that would give an unrestricted gift would ask for that. Jim, can you answer that?
I'm thinking, to me, I'm going to keep it simple. Again, they are investing in the mission. So
Yeah.
I would just report back,
Given
not on what their gift hit, but overall, the organization touched so many people, whatever your programs are,
I
etc.
would give a general impact, a general impact response would be good. I think, yeah, I agree.
Okay, and then we just got another question from Charlotte Charlotte Ann, and she's saying, "Hi, I would love to hear more from Missy about stewardship and the human touch. Could you give examples?"
Oh, yes. So a stewardship plan goes beyond emails and letters, but it includes what I would call all systematic and then personal communications. And you should, I think, as a nonprofit, profile out. Some organizations do it by gift size. I like to use the donor cycle instead. So knowing that a donor is a first-time donor, a second-time donor, and then a repeat donor, et cetera, you would increase the stewardship touches based on the relationship rather than the amount of money. But some organizations set up their stewardship $0 to $500. We're going to do these things. And so this is in the stewardship plan. This is where you can dream about how people, how you're communicating with people and how they can communicate back with you as an organization. And social media gives you so many opportunities for that two-way conversation that we used to not have. So
it's very cost effective too.
Yeah, so it's starting out with the simple basics, but believe me, if you don't get the basics right, you're not going to get 5 gifts. And that is the thank you letter, the handwritten note from so-and-so, the phone call from a board member. I mean, those are the kind of basic things. And then as you move through stewardship and you're working your stewardship program through your CRM, you understand then more about your donors, and then you can do more authentic stewardship. And authentic stewardship is around understanding a family, what's going on in someone's life, and having touches at various times. Stewardship, I would say, is a lot like dating when you get to the human touch. You can't, and some organizations over steward and they do it clumsily. And that's because you're trying too hard to be a friend with someone, and you know how when you're trying too hard to date someone and they don't want to date you, it's back off. So it's also it's getting that feedback and response, and based on that feedback and response from the prospect, what's your next move? So thinking through what they enjoy the most and getting them into the right sequence. So all the systematic things are things like the letters and the cards and the e-news and the, if you're still doing snail mail, those kinds of things. And then the human touch is the caring, and that's moving into moves management, which is probably a whole nother seminar that Jim does, in how you're connecting, how you divide up your pie, if you will, of the, most, let's say, small organizations have somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 people that are repeat and personal donors to them, that you're dividing up that pie to make sure there is a personal human touch, that someone is connecting with them through speech.
I'm going to share a favorite story. I know a development officer during this COVID social distancing. First of all, she has an advantage. She makes Mrs. Fields level chocolate chip cookies. And so, there's a, I shouldn't say to die for. She drops them off at the donor's door and rings their doorbell and waves through the window. And that cookie, I mean, this is going to people who give like millions of dollars. The cookies are that good. And it's a very, it's a way to compromise or navigate through the social distancing.
Right. And it can be done by, if you have, let's say you're in the cultural world, like working in museums and things, it's sending out the latest articles about a certain artist. I mean, it's all the intellectual things that go along with the reason the person is interested in your charity to begin with. And so what are the kinds of things that you can talk about that doesn't have anything to do with asking for money? So that when you do talk about asking for money, it's very clear that you're now, you know why and how the person is interested, and therefore you're ready to make an ask.
Yeah. Hey, we got a couple of questions, but I want to get this one in. Do you have any favorite success stories on unrestricted giving?
I think my favorite lately is probably more on a monthly giving program that a homeless shelter that was really focused on. They were very focused on asking for a thing, and because they're homeless shelter, they would need things like paper towels and toilet paper and things like that. And so we were trying to help them kind of get in the mode of making asks for the cause as a whole. And they had decided they were going to move forward with a monthly giving program, but they did not put specific things to give to. It was give to the vision of the shelter. And the shelter really came out with a bold vision for wraparound services for the first time. So they moved from offering only sheltering to offering wraparound services where people could stay inside longer and things like that. So I think the success story was that they were able to show that overarching vision and what they were going to do without saying, I need $25 for this. And they started they kicked off the monthly giving program with a board campaign, and they had the board chair, who was very invested and excited about it, stand up at an event they had. Now, I'm not so sure this has to be the way it happens, but he stood up and he said, we all need to help support getting this organization to this level so that we can keep people inside and get them through the program, and so they can get off out of homelessness and poverty and back out into the workforce. And we need everybody to give as much as they can all the time. And he said, I want a monthly donation, and everybody signed up. It was pretty phenomenal.
I'll point out, we were pleased to have Erica Worsdorp as one of our guests about a month ago. She's, I think, the first lady of monthly giving. By the way, Michael, I see a few more people indicating, do we have anybody who wants to come on camera? Missy and I are getting lonely.
We don't have anybody raising their hands right now, but we do have a few more questions that have been typed.
We'll take them.
Okay.
So Joel asked, what website do you post your 990 form on?
GuideStar. I mean,
there we go. Yep.
Yeah. Charity Navigator and GuideStar. They're
Hey,
both owned
Joel.
by the same company now, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Joel, spend tomorrow on GuideStar and then have a nice drink of wine. You'll love it. What are some of the other questions we had?
So Luis is asking, can you recommend an elevator speech that could lead to the cultivation of an unrestricted funds donor? Thank you.
That's a tough one. That's going to Missy.
Well, actually, I don't think it's that tough. I mean, you picked the charity, but the elevator speech is focused on why the charity exists and what it's trying to do. So if the charity is use the homeless shelter because that was the one I talked about a minute ago. You know, we've been sheltering 400 people a night at our shelter for the last 20 years, and recently we have really expanded our vision to move people from only sheltering to being able to engage in our programs by staying inside during the day so that they can learn the tools for a better way of living. By doing this, doubled the size of our nonprofit, and our budget literally doubled. And over the next 5 years, we plan to raise the funds to support that and continue to grow. So so my hope is that people like you and I will continue to support, if you haven't given, will consider a gift to the shelter to help us with these goals. That is an unrestricted act. It is.
Really, an unrestricted elevator speech can be the elevator speech for the mission, right?
And then the person may come back with, well, what do you need? And what size gift, could I make? And that's where you say, we need investors like you. Instead of, I need you to give to the Susie Q Club that we're opening next week, which is $400. An open amount, so in an elevator, let's say you're in an elevator, if that's true, you don't have any donor research behind you, and you perhaps don't know the person's capacity. So you can engage in conversation about the kinds of gifts they like to make. What are the kinds of things you like to support? And so if they'll suddenly start telling you, well, I gave $1,000 for a table last month at the such and such club. And you can say, if you would consider support like that to our organization, it would really help us go a long way. So you start moving into an ask amount without knowing the capacity. And that's okay. I always say for someone with enormous capacity, a gift of $10,000 or below is just a starting point.
Right. I consider it a cultivation move.
That's right.
Hey, Michael, do we have some other questions before we go to our wrap up?
So Luis just said thank you. Matt said in reference to what you were talking about earlier, remember to give your 990 to the IRS first.
Yeah.
And then Amy earlier mentioned, I love the term overstewardship. I'm going to introduce that in discussions about staff investing too much time in prospects who've signaled they won't give or give at a meaningful level. So I think we've actually answered all of the current questions.
Okay. We've earned a happy hour, but we still have a little more space. One of the other things we're talking an unrestricted fund can help you respond to unanticipated needs. And if we need any reminder what an unanticipated need, it would be for the 1.5 million nonprofits in America who had to deal with social distancing. And those, Missy, you want to amplify on that?
What occurred during COVID?
No, I'm saying how nonprofits need a little wiggle room to respond to
Right.
unanticipated
A
needs.
nonprofit organization is really no different than a for-profit organization, other than it's in many ways, other than its tax code. But I think the idea that you have to build reserves in a for-profit business is something everyone does.
It's a given.
You absolutely, you learn early on that you have to build enough reserve to cover your payroll for a certain amount of time. And you start doing that, and you invest in doing that, or you even borrow to do it.
Yeah.
Nonprofit organizations often ignore their own capacity to survive. And I call it the nonprofit starvation cycle. I see it all the time, especially with small organizations. they're so focused on their mission and producing their mission that they're giving everything to their mission at the expense of feeding the mothership. And so building out reserves, not overextending in your expenses until you're ready, are two basic principles of any business for a business to be successful. And so when something like this pandemic hit, I mean, I have a small business. We were hit hard. It was tough. And so, you know, the lessons you learn from these things are making sure that while you want to serve the world and the world needs you, you've got to right size your programs to keep the business alive, the nonprofit business alive, without, you know, without the, I should say, so that it stays alive with the anticipated revenue year over year, as opposed to a single gift or a single donor. And you'll sometimes see with a young nonprofit that a single donor is running that organization and also giving to it. And the minute they go away, you're in really bad trouble. So it's really running the nonprofit business like a business and recognizing that it needs to have money in order to operate. And that unrestricted gifts then give you that buffer, that opportunity for a buffer when you don't get the gift that you hope for, or when the economy changes, or when something goes on tilt, or you have a demand of your service that you want to do, and you want to be able to bring in a new program, but you don't necessarily haven't saved enough in the background to be able to build that program. And so grant chasing to just get the program in place and then a year later not having money to operate the organization is also a problem. I think operating should be built into every restricted.
I think, you know, like the best practice is to have 3 to 6 months. But one of the areas we covered, I think bears repeating. Can you talk about, you called it the bundled ask. I'm referring it to the consolidated ask. Can you talk a little more on how unrestricted fits into that?
So the unrestricted gift usually, again, is the primary gift that an individual makes, and they make it over time unless they're doing it through a special event or something. But let's say they've just made that nice unrestricted gift and they're willing to give to the organization without having it go to a program or capital. But then you have a program or capital where you're asking people to invest in that because you want to do something different, broader, bigger, whatever the reason for doing that is. And so that you don't have a situation where you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You always look back and say, okay, this is a donor who's making unrestricted gifts to us year over year, and they're really nice, solid gifts. So when you go into conversation with that donor, you have prepared that you're going to make it easy for them to continue to make the unrestricted gift and make the restricted gift at the same time. And that you can build into your recognition program the opportunity for them to be recognized on both sides. I actually have pushed many nonprofits to consider cumulative giving. And so, you know, you're going to have your donor recognition policy for a capital campaign or something like for an endowment. You have a recognition policy, and I get that. And that's important that you have those in place too to drive giving in those areas. But you can recognize people for cumulative giving and their restricted giving together and bring them to a higher level. It's just recognition. Yeah. So I don't see why you can't do it.
Hey, talking about recognition, I went to your website and there was a wonderful piece about the power of a handwritten note. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. And I've been hearing this a lot actually since COVID, that all of us were getting tired of snail mail and digital's the way to go and social's the way to go. And now I'm hearing, well, people are sitting at home with nothing to do and they wait for the mail to come. There is something personal still in today's society. I don't know if it will be different for when my children are my age. But there is something very personal about knowing that somebody sat down and took the time to write a note, say something directly to you through a note. it makes people feel good.
I
And
mean, use
that's what we're
this.
looking to do.
Use this contrasting. The average person receives probably at least 150 email a day. Ask yourself, how many handwritten notes do you receive each day?
Oh, maybe one every month or two, unless it's right after Christmas when we've made a lot of gifts. It's
You know
very,
what's
very,
great? I don't know about you, you keep them. I don't know anybody keeps their email. You
yeah,
keep those handwritten notes.
sure.
We're got a few minutes. We talked about to another thing. The board and staff have to lead by example. And can you talk a little more about your experience working with nonprofits and challenging boards and management?
I like the picture you have here in your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
What I like about it is the person turning around and locking eyes and shaking hands.
Mhm.
Board members want to connect with our donors, and they don't become board members if they're not interested in doing those kinds of things. But they often don't have all the information to do it. So for board members can be the best stewards of all.
Mm.
And we tend to share with them the big gifts and the big donors, but we don't necessarily share with them all the unrestricted donors. So, I mean, I like seeing,
You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought of it that
yeah,
way.
I like seeing the whole gift list. I want to see the whole gift list. Like, I don't care if somebody gave $50 or because I might know that person. And then I can say, oh, wow, I noticed that you support such and such charity that I serve on the board on. That's a wonderful starting conversation.
Yeah, yeah. We're in our wrap up mode now. We got, let's see, a couple of minutes left, and I want to bring Joel on at the end. Um, if I was hearing you and getting back to Valerie's question, how do we get people excited about giving to unrestricted gifts? Well, you can put in stories of how lives are touched, improved, and saved, and talk about mission impact. I like to, we didn't get time to discuss it, but I like the way you refer the donors as organizational sustainers.
Mhm. They are. I mean, they're who keeps us there. Um,
I'm going in my hurry up mode.
Go ahead.
And by the way, I love this. We all have favorite quotes. This was from Maya Angelou, the late poet. And she said, people will not remember what you said. They won't even remember what you did. They will never forget how you made them feel. And our challenge as fundraisers, whether we're on staff and paid or on the board and volunteers or work real hard, we just don't pay you. It's to make our donors and our donor prospects feel like the most important people in the world. It's that simple. Hey, Joel, are you there? Joel Batalski.
Did we keep him?
Did we have Joel? But anyways, this is the slide I say. I give a money back guarantee at every one of my board training sessions. The more you ask, a funny thing happens. What happens, Missy?
The more you get.
I mean, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. This is a quote we use to end our shows. John F. Kennedy said this at the American University commencement on June 10th, 1963. And every time I read it, it gives me goosebumps because I have this feeling he's speaking to us right now in the year 2021. And he talked about our basic common link that we all inhabit the small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we're all mortal. I swear he knew what was going to happen. I mean, we're all in this together.
We are.
Well, I want to thank my friend and colleague, Missy Gale, from sharing from her treasure chest of experience.
Thank you for having me.
And guess what? You know what happens when you do a good job, Missy? We're going to ask you back, okay?
All right. You ask and you'll get.
Yes, where I heard that somewhere. And Missy and I and Michael Argent are going to promise you that 2021 is going to be a memorable year. By the way, next week, we usually do this weekly. Because of the inauguration, we are skipping next week. And then I'm scheduled, I think, for every Wednesday for the rest of the year. But I want to thank everyone in our learning audience who contributes so much in our connection here, but also the work you're doing in our community, again, to touch, improve, and save lives. You are heroes to us. Thank you. Everyone stay safe and get your left or right arm ready to get that vaccine. And we'll see you next week. Missy, this was perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate it. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Michael?